We're here with Meredith Wills. She is a data scientist and she's Director of Operations of Soliton Solutions.
Soliton Sports Solutions.
Thank you for correcting. Soliton Sports Solutions. And she's done lots of work peripherally in the game of baseball around science and data, and she's also worked with folks in the game. And welcome, Meredith.
Hi.
So tell us a little bit about your story, how you got trained in your field and then transitioned into baseball.
Well, I guess I should start by saying my professional background is astrophysics. I have a PhD in astrophysics. I did research for NASA for, excuse me, for about 20 years. That being said, I was basically born a baseball fan, and so when people say, how does an astrophysicist get into baseball, it's like, well, no, actually, it's kind of the other way around. I was always a baseball fan. I love astro. Specifically, I studied the sun, but after 20 years, I wanted to do something else, and so I jumped ship about 3 years ago and have gotten into, specifically, I'm very interested in the idea of player and multiplayer tracking, the kind of stuff that Higo and StatCast are going to be producing. So, you could say, no pun intended, that I've come in from left field with a very different background. I'm a data scientist. I'm a physicist. I am not a statistician. Very important to understand that.
Yes. So talk about some of the data you've worked with, maybe at NASA or otherwise, but a lot of what we're presenting this course to be is an introduction to data science.
Yeah.
The idea is that baseball certainly uses data, and that we can take that interest in some specific application like baseball, but really start becoming a data scientist. So talk about that.
Yeah. Well, again, with the player tracking, my background in astro was studying the corona of the sun. And I can give you links if you want to really cool movies, but basically, unlike other parts of astrophysics, the sun is very dynamic. It changes. And the stuff that I studied, in fact, were solitons, hence the name of the company, which are these massive waves that would travel through the corona. And so my specialty was developing automated tracking methods to find things that at the time people did not think you could track automatically. Now, if you think about baseball players, it turns out it's kind of the same thing. In fact, I ended up getting into this almost by accident. Corey Schwartz, who you interviewed before, he and I had a discussion about this, and he said, oh yeah, they're starting to do this player tracking thing. This was back in, I think, 2011. And I realized, well, wait a minute, the skill set I have is perfect for this. And I came up with this whole outline, and I mean, it's actually scary when I think about how much work I put in. Initially realized there were certain kinds of technology that were obvious, and that some parts could be better than others, and that, yeah, essentially the astrophysics skill set and the baseball background that I had were a perfect match for doing hopefully automated player tracking technology, which is where StatCast appears to be going.
Right. So do you have advice for early data scientists who might be thinking, hey, I love baseball, but I also just have been exposed to data work, and it seems really interesting. Some advice for early data scientists who might be taking our course.
Well, and this is how do I put this? The statistics is important. However, the analogy that came to mind is, how the military always develops things for the last war. They're always training for the last war. By virtue of, R is important, SQL is important. Learn Python. Get into, don't do statistics or finance. Get into a STEM, if you're a student, get into a STEM major. You want to do physics, you want to do biology, you want to do something honestly with data visualization and learn how to do that in a computational way, because if you're going to get into the next round of technology, right now what's been published, like the Sports Illustrated articles that have come out, show single numbers for route efficiency. But what is going to be useful and quite honestly I think more appealing to people is this stuff isn't going to be numbers. These are pictures. And they're not just pictures, but you can actually have dynamic pictures. You can have movies of let's say where a shortstop is playing the ball. It's not a single number. It's an area, and it's an area that's going to change over the course of the season. It's going to change over the course of his career. And there's a lot of things you can learn from that. But if you're just doing, tables or pulling things out with SQL and pulling things out with R, you can't see the space. And I mean, scouts love this. I actually talked to one team I was with is based in the Dominican League, and they were worried because they have people who speak all of these different languages, and they're like, so can you give us data where you have very short sentences, so that our players aren't confused? And I said, well, no, actually, I can give you data that doesn't have any words at all. They were ecstatic, but that's what it is. You can sort of just turn it into images.
So going from linear routes or circuit lines as opposed to areas. I think areas are right, and believe it or not, we covered this in our course by a man named Hugh Fullerton. Hugh Fullerton was our second sabermetrician that we talked about, and Hugh's probably the most obscure of the bunch. We did Chadwick, F.C. Lane, Branch Rickey, Alan Roth.
The original defensive stuff where he was defining ellipses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he does these areas based on observation of the range that players took during a game, and he created ovals, ellipses of the places players cover, and it was fascinating. But it sounds very similar to what you're suggesting as a way to think about defense.
Well, the analysis I've already done, I can tell you that an oval is not a very good maybe the zeroth order or first order. It's an adequate representation, but part of the beauty of doing this data visualization analysis is you can figure out not just the total area, but where is, say, your center fielder or your shortstop most likely to field the ball. It's not going to be the center of the oval, very unlikely. And how much area they cover is gonna vary from Johnny Peralta versus Troy Tulowitzki. I'm sorry, it's a huge difference. Or Derek Jeter from the beginning of his career to now.
So this is a great question, because what Fullerton actually talks about is that there is variation right to left, but the biggest variation is front and back. He said that the range of players front and back is extremely different. They don't seem to cover. It's not a perfect oval from the center where a player might stand. They kind of go back at different distances and front different distances a lot compared to the left and right motion. Did you find anything like that?
I haven't actually had enough data to do a good comparison on that, but yeah, the front to back is definitely strikes me as more likely, because the focus for skill sets for middle infielders is on lateral motion. So where you're going to see differences are people who are able to come forward, or are a bit better at judging a ball when they're moving back into left field, or I suppose in this case left field for a shortstop.
So you and I actually met in Phoenix during the Saber Analytics conference there. What do you think about the emergence of these new interns running around, getting baseball operations jobs, and then going to these meetings, looking for work? there really does seem to be a transition from at least just 5-10 years ago in the number of opportunities for young people to start working in the game. Have you noticed that? What do you think of this transition?
I tell you, I am delighted with the case competitions that Sabres had. I've gotten to know some of the students. I could drop names. A friend of mine actually recently got the Phillies internship, which, by the way, I would not be qualified for because I never played collegiate or professional baseball. Let me put in a plug for the fact that there are women out there who are good and who know the game. And could they please start leaving that off as a recommendation? Because, you know, baseball needs scientists, but baseball needs women. Sorry, I needed to put that plug in. But
I'm with
yeah,
you.
there are. I don't know. The whole sport is sort of getting younger as the technology is coming in. The GMs are getting younger. You know, you have data analysts coming in who are digital natives because they have to be digital natives. And you know, I would say it's on the right track, but I would like to see, again, more STEM people. That's what's got to happen before you get the player tracking up. You know, a lot of the previous interviews, people said, wow, we're going to have all these data, we have no idea what to do with it. If you've actually done data analysis, it's probably in a different field because the data aren't available for baseball. Although basketball has SportView. Let's see, Catapult is starting to be used in the D leagues for the NBA and in NFL, although those data aren't available yet. But you know, there are opportunities even in sports to start looking at, you know, two-dimensional dynamic data. But from anywhere, you know, this is what you want to do for the next generation.
So I had this on my office hours last night. A student asked, publicly available spatial data in other sports. And do you know of any publicly available movement data in other sports?
Oh boy, well, is it Kirk Goldsberry? I think Kirk's his first name. Goldsberry. Yeah. Has been doing a lot with the SportView data. That has been interpreted as publicly available, although I haven't really seen many people other than him and his colleagues working with it. So I think I don't know, maybe he knows somebody. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places. So the SportView data are the best way to go. The other thing is that a lot of colleges are now using SportView. I mean, I'm in Kentucky, near Lexington. University of Kentucky is right here. They've installed a SportView system. So any UK students out there, find out if you can be involved, and maybe you can look at their SportView data, you know, as an example. But they're not the only basketball team to do that, or I should say NCAA team. So
that's really interesting that Kentucky and others are installing the systems. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that before, so that's great.
Yeah, that's the top-ranked NCAA teams. Or I know UK has it, but they're not the only one.
Tell us about this new system. What we're going to learn with the thing that MLBAM's working on right now.
Well, the key there is that, well, first of all, that they're tracking the ball in play quite well. I've seen the videos that they released. The most recent one I saw was Puig and McCutcheon, 2 catches, you know, spectacular catches that were done. And Sports Illustrated did a very useful, or I should say, insightful write-up on that, which I can go into a bit. But what they showed was the, you know, essentially the route that was taken, how long it took the player to get to the ball. You know, obviously they were these amazing diving catches because that's what everybody thinks is cool. The idea of where the player is and how he moves, that turns out to give you a lot of information. And where it's going to start becoming interesting is when we stop looking at the individual spectacular plays. First of all, because spectacular plays should not be representative. You know, a diving catch, in fact, this is how Sports Illustrated put it, a diving catch for Puig, they said it represented athleticism. The fact that McCutcheon, in fact, I don't think he dove for it as much. He basically just played it. And that for McCutcheon, it just sort of showed that he was good at what he did, in fact, because it was slightly less spectacular. Bill James, and it's a shame how late I was introduced to Bill James. I had a very good friend of mine introduced me to the abstracts again just like maybe 4 years ago. Again, I apologize to everybody for not having grown up on Bill James, but in his first couple abstracts, 78, 79, he discusses defense and talks about the idea that a third makes a spectacular diving catch, that's remembered. But if the ball's hit straight to him, it's not. Now, the guy where the ball is hit straight to him, he's actually positioned better to begin with. So, you know, that's, you would argue that's better defense. You know, yes, sometimes diving for the ball is athleticism, but sometimes it's poor positioning. Mm-hmm. And the pre-play positioning is actually something a lot of teams are interested in. You know, hence the shifts that you're seeing all of a sudden. Suddenly every team is shifting, which is key. So once you start getting more information, you can start essentially building on, you know, what's a typical route efficiency for a player, not just a single one. You know, what kind of field area coverage does a player have? And you can start integrating how the players play together. You know, you can see, for instance, what is the area coverage for your shortstop versus your third baseman versus your second baseman. Well, if you've got a huge overlap between the third baseman and the shortstop, maybe you should move one of them for where they're starting out their pre-play positioning so that you don't get redundancy. You know, there's a big hole up the middle, you know, so the balls are going into center field. Well, maybe if you move your shortstop closer to second base because the third baseman's already covering, you know, any ball that's hit towards left field, then, you know, you're improving your defense. It's the, what's it, the hit 'em where they ain't kind of thing. If you can position your players so that there are as few holes as possible, it gets much harder for the other team to hit them where they ain't.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. The notion seems correct that these should be areas.
Yes.
With probabilities, right? So you have some kind of probability map that gets to, you know, this is the 90% range, this is the 50% range, this is the 10% range.
Yeah.
You know, those are what I'd want as a rule, but the idea that you'd map a range with this kind of probability on top of it, then you're talking about placement, exact placement based on hit charts. This new generation of data will be much more thorough. It'll have starting point, it'll have reaction time, it'll have distance covered, so that you can start developing these, you know, these three-dimensional views of what a player is, including probabilities, counts, and how far they can move in area, in 2 dimensions. So
they discussed at Sloan that they were going to have about 7 terabytes of data per game. That works out to 17 petabytes per season once you take into account 162 game days, 15 games per game day. That's a lot of data. Now, that's all the data. That's not compressed. That's not broken down. And I give Higo and the StatCast team a lot of credit for the fact that they're not just chucking data to begin with. I can tell you from my Astro background that the worst possible thing you can do is to decide ahead of time, oh yeah, only this stuff's important throughout everything else, and then you discover later, well, actually, we needed this other thing that no longer exists. And that they do have storage that is going to be able to keep a few years of data around. This has already been set up. The public availability, and I'm speculating here, may to some extent actually depend on that sheer quantity of data. because even the teams, as far as I can tell, and again, it's almost hearsay, so I can't give you direct sources. I just know I've had these conversations that the teams themselves there's so much data that they don't know almost if they can do anything with it, let alone what they can do. And some of that, I'm sure, is just because of the background, because you have people who think in statistics instead of data visualization analysis. So there are concerns, and this was sort of upsetting to hear, where they're like, this may just die in a few years because the teams will have all these data and not know how to analyze it. And I was going to say, I would argue you need scientists more than engineers.
And I would agree. It's funny. It's funny how you say that, but I don't know how much you've seen of our course, but the big thing I always remind our students of is that treat this as it's your science. Treat this as if it's your approach to the world, and like any scientist, we just start looking very carefully at what we're seeing. We just observe and observe and observe. We keep observing, we keep reading and observing, and eventually that natural curiosity, and I don't care if you're the hyper curious or average curious, everyone's curiosity will drive questions and drive these ideas. And so
one of the things that, sorry.
Go ahead.
What I was going to say, first of all, I loved your first lecture or two where you did focus on science and the nature of science. I think I put some stuff up on Twitter about that because I was so excited that you were approaching it like science. But, okay, Sean, this is not meant as a criticism. This is just background versus yours. I saw Sean Foreman's interview, and you'd asked him about, did he see this as science? And his response was, well, I can't do an experiment and test it. And so therefore, as an astrophysicist, we don't get to test anything. We don't get to run out there and say, hi, we want this solar flare to go off right now so that we can test it. It doesn't work that way. You start with the data and you have to observe. It's observational science. Baseball, very similar. You can't predict it. You have to start with what you're given. And it's absolutely real science, Sean. I promise. I can show you lots of stuff I've done on the sun.
I'm with you too, and I think that's really one of the best things about this approach. People always are sort of shocked at the idea that baseball is a science. I kind of throw it out there very flippantly, not precisely, but I throw it out there so that I get people's attention. And they go, what, baseball? Science? And so part of this discussion is to train people who, think this is just sport to explain that this is serious. This is people who care about baseball and they want to understand it better. And that's no different than an astrophysicist wanting to understand solar flares better. It's an interest, and people should, pursue their interests to the best of their abilities. So I'm glad you appreciated that, because it's sort of a little theme with me, is to promote this idea that we can treat the game scientifically, and we can really think about it like any scientist who does physics or genetics or any other field. So last, I understand that you're in the Hall of Fame.
Yes, I am. Are you talking to any other Hall of Famers for your interviews, out of curiosity?
No one who has a plaque.
Okay, I do not have a plaque. I have a little bitty card that has my name on it, but I do not have an actual plaque.
Well, tell me about that, though. You have something in the Hall of Fame.
Okay, let's see. So in addition to the astrophysics and the baseball, my third passion is knitting and knitting design. In fact, if you've seen me at the Saber conference or Sloan or whatever, you may have seen me knitting during talks. I actually do this. It helps me pay attention. Sounds weird. think of it as instead of doodling. So a few years ago, a fan organization called Stitch and Pitch had a national contest for baseball themed, among other things, knitting designs. And I came up with a design, which, by the way, is available online, and you can do it for any team. It's for free. I can give you the link for that if you want. For all those knitters out there who are taking your course. But anyway, this design won this national contest. A couple years later, I was approached by the Baseball Hall of Fame because they wanted to recognize Stitch and Pitch as a fan organization, and so they asked for my award-winning socks. They happen to be Colorado Rockies because I, lived in Colorado for a number of years. They're the team I've come to love and follow, and they're on display in the Today's History section of the Hall of Fame. I believe they're still there. Also, one of the advantages, I also had a pair of Yankee socks, but I decided to donate the Rockies socks because if they were Yankees, they'd be down in the vault right now, as opposed to the Rockies have about 15 things in the Hall of Fame, and my socks are 2 of them. So,
Well, I was running down the list quickly of people we've interviewed, and I don't think any of them are in the Hall of Fame. So I'm not exactly 100% sure of that, but that's really cool that you've got something there. That's a great story.
By the way, I pointed out earlier about, actually, was it in a conversation we had before the meeting or before we started talking or not, but my dad's dream for me was to be a Baseball Hall of Famer. Now, he thought I was going to be a ball player, but when this happened, he doesn't care about my astro degrees. He doesn't care about the PhD. The fact that I got into the Hall of Fame was, for my father, the crowning achievement in my life. I have now validated all of his hopes for me by being in the Hall of Fame.
Well, that's terrific. I'm glad your dad's proud, as any father or mother, friend, sibling.
My dad's a baseball person. It's okay. Yeah. My mom taught me to knit, though.
Very good. Well, Meredith, I can't thank you enough for this interview. Again, the whole point of the interview series was to enhance the experience of the learner, expand their idea about what can be done in the game, what can be thought of as an approach to the game, as either with data, with science, with sabermetrics, analytics, and I think you've really added to the conversation with our interview series. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this.
Good, I'm glad. So we'll see you down the road somewhere.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Meredith.